Hello everyone, welcome to this week's video where I actually have the pleasure of having my best friend join me on today's conversation. I nearly had to pull her ear to do this with me, but she is here nonetheless, so I'm grateful. So I actually brought my friend Erika on, who I'll actually let her introduce herself a little bit briefly, just tell you a little bit about herself, some fun facts while we're both here on our little mini getaway. So without
Hi guys, my name is Erika. I've known Lindsay here for 7 years. I have 3 children. I'm married and I've been married for how long?
1,000 years.
Before I met Lindsay, so almost a decade now.
She's an aspiring nurse, so she is going to school to be a nurse.
Yeah, I'm still in school, so still working on that.
Absolutely. So she's going to be a great nurse, but I'm truly grateful for her being in this video with me, just because, again, I want to be able to not just be able to put out what I think and what I've learned and what I've researched, but also actually give those live in vivo experiences that people have and opinions that people have, because that way we can all kind of add a little grain of salt to a mixture. I'm very grateful for Erika having agreed to being on this video, just because this is what this channel is about. It's about talking to different people from all different parts of life to be able to share their experience in relation to what death is, what the grief experience is, and what their experience with those topics are. So without further ado, we're going to start. So I'm just going to ask Erika a couple of questions just so we can kind of get some insight into what she thinks about topics related to death. So for example, my first question for you, Erika, is what does death mean to you? Like, when you think of death, what are some of the things that come to mind?
I think the first thing I think of when I think of death is loss. Just like in general, losing a person or losing memories or just everything that comes with it. That's my initial thought. And then the second thing would be like the funeral, probably, because that's all anybody talks about. When somebody dies, it's like, oh, well, when's the funeral, when's the viewing, when's this, when's that, and then that's all that ever happens, and then it's kind of over and everybody has to get over it.
Right, so it's almost like it's a very kind of systematic thing where you die and the next thing is like, okay, what's the next step? The funeral, what's the next step? You bury the person or you cremate the person, then what's the next step? And as Erika's mentioned, we don't really have a guide of what you do after the funeral. You kind of just all go your separate ways, and those people that said whatever you need, I'm here for you, I'm supporting you, quickly kind of fade in. Of course, there are still those few that still do keep their word and mean what they say when they say, I'm here to support you, and try to reach out. So when you think of death, do you think of it as a beginning or an end of something?
I feel like an end, like the end of somebody's life, and then like the end of a chapter, or yeah, like the end of a chapter. Because let's say if somebody from my family died, it'd be like I'm losing them, so that's the end of that chapter, and that's all I got with them.
Right. So the reason I ask this is because, believe it or not everyone thinks of death as the ending. There are a lot of cultures, a lot of religions that think of death as actually the beginning. They think of death as the point of life. It's almost to say that life is a part of death rather than death being a part of life. We're going to talk about those philosophical topics in other videos. But my next question to you, Erika, is, as being part of the Hispanic culture, particularly the Mexican American culture, is death something that, at least in your family, is talked about? Growing up, did your parents ever mention it to you? Was there ever a plan? And so forth?
No, like never. I feel like even up until now, we've never talked about it. Like, yeah, it's happened, but just like it happens, it's like a little blur, and then we go to the funeral, we go to the viewing, and then that's it. You never talk about it again. So it's not like an open conversation. And then I've never had a conversation with my parents about what they want to do, like when they die, like if they want to be buried, where they want to be buried, if they want to be cremated. Jokingly, I've told them, like, if I die before anybody else, I want to be cremated, just like, dispose of me, I don't care. But it's never been like an in-depth conversation where we sit down and, you know, truly talk it out. I feel like it's very, I don't know, like Mexicans don't really talk about emotions that much. So I feel like this is a very touchy-feely like subject that people just don't want to deal with.
All right, Erica, so I know that you mentioned that one of the reasons perhaps that your parents avoided talking about death, you know, with you and your siblings growing up is because it was too touchy-feeling. So I want you to explain a little bit more or elaborate, what does too touchy-feeling mean for your family, and why do you think your parents intentionally or unintentionally avoided the conversation of death with you guys?
I think growing up, we never really talked feelings with our parents. Like, they never really asked us, like, how are you? Like, how really are you? How are you feeling? It was more of like, oh, how was your day? Like, oh, what'd you do? Not really like, how. So since death was more on the, like, an emotion question that had to do, like, with how are you taking this personally? How is it affecting you? I feel like my parents and just the Hispanic culture or Mexican culture in general don't know how to approach questions like that because they're very closed off, I feel like, or even just the older generation. I don't know about, you know, the newer people, but that's just the way I was, and it was with me with my family growing up. We were never really like a very close-knit, I don't know, how do you say it?
Like you guys didn't really have these deep conversations about how you guys actually felt or like about the future. It was more like, okay, everyone's doing their own thing.
Pretty
you
much.
know, we're kind of making sure that we're doing what we got to do, but not really discussing the in-betweens. Is that, do you think that perhaps your parents in particular were afraid or are afraid to talk to you about that?
I don't know if it was that they're afraid. Maybe it's just because they were never talked to about it. Like, and like them growing up, I know they come from really large families, so I feel like they never got like the one-on-one time with their parents to discuss it, so they just didn't know how to talk to it or talk to us about it. So that's just all they could pass down, what they knew or didn't know.
Right, and that happens a lot of times in families where, again, it's not until someone in the lineage actually stops and thinks and evaluates, like, well, like, I know this is how we're operating in this family, but why are we operating this way? You know, why do we do these certain things? Why do we behave this certain way? Why do we perhaps act in a more robotic kind of way just because we learned that that's how it is, rather than trying to be curious about it and actually investigate for yourself if that's something that you want to be able to follow through. It's not until someone in the family actually comes to ask these questions that they stop that cycle of like, well, listen, I understand that this is how it's been done for generations, but that's not what's actually working for me. Because you mentioned that you have a family of 3 kids and a husband, so how do you foresee yourself? Now, your kids are babies, so I understand that obviously, you know, kids, it's very difficult to have these conversations with them, but how do you foresee yourself in the future, perhaps having a conversation about death and what death is and perhaps some future plannings? How do you see that conversation happening with your family?
I feel like it's definitely something I want to do with them. I'm a lot more open with them, and I ask them on the daily, like, how are you feeling? Like, why are you feeling this? Or how can I help? So I want them to be comfortable enough to come to me with any questions, even regarding death. So I don't know, like, right now exactly how we're going to handle it, but I do know that that's something that will be discussed once they're, you know, more aware and can understand what it really is.
All right, so my final question, Erica, I know you mentioned that you want to be able to do things a little bit differently than your parents and actually have the conversation with your kids about death and anything that may come up of it. What do you think are the benefits, and why do you feel like you want to change something that you, in essence, have learned from your own family?
I don't want them to think that it's a taboo, like, type subject, because it's normal. Like, it's nothing out of the ordinary for somebody to die. So I don't want them to be afraid of it and think it's something they have to hide from or, you know, internalize and not be able to talk to somebody about it if it's affecting them. So I just want to kind of normalize the subject and just let them know that it's okay.
Right, because death is something that, again, I mention every single time. it's something we all have in common. The only thing you need to die is to be alive. And if you're watching this video, unless you're in the other world, I'm assuming you're very alive. So yeah, so it's definitely something that it's not easy to have the conversation. It's not pleasant initially, but I think it can be very fruitful because, like for instance, you said that normally when you think of death, you think of the loss of someone and then the funeral. And then what else? You see, people, this is why we need to have these conversations, because there is a life after death. Things do come up after death. Then it's when the funeral ends or whatever services you decide to have for your loved one, that's when the real shit kicks in. You know, that's when the unpleasant feelings, the sadness, the angst, the shock, that's when everything kicks in, and that's what we need to talk about, because these are normal reactions to a devastating reality like death. So I thank you. I know that I had to literally pull her ear to be on this video because she's so camera ready for me all the time. But I thank you for honestly opening up, because again, the more we talk about these things and kind of ask the questions, the more we can understand each other, and the more we can actually see that while yes, death is something we don't want to happen to any of our loved ones, it's something that at some point we do have to prepare for. Mentally, emotionally, spiritually, financially, especially financially, because do you realize it's not cheap to die? It's not. And you don't want to leave that financial burden to your family. So that's why these conversations, it's more than just the emotional aspect of it. There are other aspects of that benefit, you know, having these conversations. So I truly hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, any feedback, any suggested topics, please feel free to comment below or to email me at alifeafterdeath0322@gmail.com. Please, if you haven't already done so, subscribe, like my videos, share them. If you don't want to have the conversation, let me have the conversations with your loved ones. Just share my video and I'll talk right on with them, okay? So thank you guys so much. And just a little preview of where we are. I know it's really hard to see, but there you go. There you have it. Enjoy.